Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, wherever you are joining from. Very nice to be part of this session. Let me begin by introducing myself. I'm Shreya Kaushik, Research and Strategic Reporting Advisor for Finance Asia. It's an Oxfam program working towards advocating for financial sector responsibility in Asia. And I would like to welcome all of you to this panel titled Designing Inclusive Climate Finance for Shared Water Ecosystem and Dependent Communities. And this session and panel is being organized by Fair Finance Asia and Transboundary Rivers and South Asia program. Both are Oxfam programs. The discussion today is actually aimed at underlining the need for climate finance for water-dependent communities and to highlight the existing barriers to access it across gender, caste, demographic, and marginalized communities. We feel that this is an extremely topical issue, bringing in the intersection of community issues as well as linking it to climate finance. But before I begin the session, very brief housekeeping announcements to all of you. Please keep your eye on the chat for relevant links that my colleagues will share to gather your questions, comments, or any feedback survey that you will receive for this discussion. On this panel today, we are actually bringing in a multi-level perspective from organizations, not just working on the riverine communities, but also from institutions that are engaging with multi-stakeholders at the intersection of climate finance, as well as from multilateral development institutions such as Asian Development Bank, who is also part of this panel. We are joined today with this very diverse panel, and I will introduce each of the speakers as we progress further in the session. And very quickly moving ahead, let us hear, and we have the panelists from civil societies, and I would like to bring in the perspectives and hear ground level perspectives on climate resilience of riverine communities and how essentially is climate finance relevant for them. But before I call on the panelists, let me very quickly introduce our first two. Please allow me to welcome Danika and Janatun. Danika Sapnet is the Director for Climate Policy at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities and has extensive experience of working on climate, energy, and low carbon solutions to enable fair and climate resilient development at the national and international levels. She is joined on the first intervention by our second panelist, Janatun Naeem Monira, who is the Advocacy and Capacity Building and Documentation Officer at Center for Disability and Development Bangladesh. She's an expert in working on sexual and reproductive health issues and water governance, disaster reduction, and gender disability inclusion. So moving very quickly on Danika, please, based on your experience at ICSC, specifically on the initiative on climate finance accountability, could you please reflect on measures or monitoring systems that trace climate finance from policy formulation, not just on the ground level implementation, but at the community level outcomes as well of the project funds? Over to you, Danika.
Thank you very much, Shreya. I would like to first, of course, introduce what Climate Finance Accountability Initiative is and how ICSC was involved in this research initiative, which started way back 2013 also. So as we go to the next slide, quickly, the Climate Finance Accountability Initiative, it is a collaborative platform, as we say, because it provides an independent review of the climate finance flows from adaptation and mitigation initiatives for developed countries. So the snapshot here of climate-related finance flows to the Southeast Asia countries and the Philippines was a recent updated refer that our team developed, and it was presented last year at the Conference of Parties in the UNFCCC, sharing our experience and how much is already allocated in the Philippines and other Southeast Asian countries in terms of adaptation and mitigation, and of course, looking at the cross-cutting issues. So as we go to the next slide also, so the Climate Finance Accountability Initiative, that's why there's a beyond its original function. As I mentioned a while ago, it started 2013, but it's looking at development of assessments, policy recommendation on multilateral development banks, multilateral climate finance, and national development finance institutions, and of course, as a support to the global call for reforms in the international climate finance architecture. So it's not just looking at the finance flow, how much is coming in to a specific country, but it's also looking at specific aspect of where does the money go, how is it utilized, and who are the beneficiaries at the local level, coming from the perspective, of course, from bilateral institutions, from the MDBs, from climate finance mechanisms, such as the Green Climate Fund, Adaptation Fund, and other climate funds, and of course, how the national development finance institutions, particularly here in the Philippines, are catalysts in terms of cascading climate finance also in the country. So as I mentioned also a while ago, the original function is actually, as we go to the next slide, it started as an adaptation finance accountability initiative. So it only focused on adaptation for that matter. And it was a climate finance tracking research led by the Overseas Development Institute, the World Resource Institute, and Oxfam America in partnership with several civil society organizations in Zambia, Nepal, Uganda, and the Philippines, where ICSE served as the focal point for the Philippines. So we sustained the AFI initiative and revamped it to Climate Finance Accountability Initiative, but still following the methodology as we go to the next slide, which is looking at the data first, data mining the data, developing the baseline data generated from the OECD DAC and other reporting platforms and databases on climate finance. So before we're only looking at OECD, but right now we're looking to triangulate the data so that we'll have more rich information on the climate finance flows, especially for a specific country. And we're doing that right now for the Philippines. So the next step is, of course, we have to approach the donor and know their perspective about the climate finance commitments they made to our country, so that we'll be able to understand further why is it tagged as climate finance, or why is it tagged as climate adaptation, mitigation for loss and damage, for gender responsive climate initiatives, and other sectors as well. The next stage is, of course, engaging the stakeholders. So it doesn't stop at looking at the perspective of the donors, but it's also looking at the perspective of the stakeholders who will be receiving the money and also implementing the initiatives, especially at the local level. So at the end of the day, it's going to be the beneficiaries who would really see the impact of our climate finance. And that's where the local tracking initiative is very important, because it's a matter of field visits, interview, analysis of all the data, looking at a number of money as based on a document, looking at the impact, making it more human in that sense, looking at how these are really implemented at the local level. But then again, while we see the beauty, of course, of tracking climate finance, we see some specific findings from our initiative also. So as we go to the next slide, we always say that the baseline research is only the starting point. So if we want to see, of course, the impact of climate finance at the local and the sectoral levels, we really need to do comprehensive exploration at the national and local levels. And that's where the local tracking initiatives come in. And of course, the engagement with our stakeholders. So it's not just a one-to-one end discussion or a research for that matter when we say we're looking at or we're looking at the impact of climate finance. But there are also some factors that hinders, of course, our initiative, our research also. For instance, there's a lack of consolidated system of managing climate-related portfolio. So we're looking at, of course, one, two, three, or several portfolio. But then we have to ensure that it's really aligned with the reporting systems and what's all actually reported by several sources also. So it's really the consolidated system that's really lacking, or that's hindering our analysis for that matter also. And again, it's connected to number two, which is the limited availability of documents that are publicly provided. That's why when we start our local tracking initiative, often that's where we receive some documents that are not published but are very important to paint the picture of the whole climate finance tracking mechanism. But an opportunity is that there are interest from donors, from sources, in looking at the actual implementation of projects, because for, of course, for their perspective also, they don't want to just provide the money, but they also want to see the impact. So we always say that it's always top down and a bottom up approach when it comes to climate finance tracking. So it's not just receiving the money, it's not only downloading the money, but looking at how the totality of the impact of it at the donor level, and of course at the local level. So yeah, that's how it is in our initiative, the Climate Finance Tracking Initiative. Thank you, Shreya.
Thank you so much, Danika. And it is actually very interesting to see hear about the initiative and how tracking financial flows for adaptation-linked climate funding can help in advocating for better outcomes at the community level. And I think we at Fair Finance Asia have also a little bit of experience in doing the financial flow analysis, and we realized that looking at transboundary investments helps a lot in having more responsibility at the financial sector level as well. So very quickly now, moving on to Janatun, and I would request you, Janatun, to kindly share your experience of working with riverine communities in Bangladesh, and what are some of the tangible ways where local needs and knowledge of the water-dependent communities is built into the design of climate finance. If you could touch upon your experience here, it would be very enlightening for the panel. Over to you, Janatun.
Thank you, Sarah, for the question. As I directly involved with TROSA project, and I am the representative of riverine community people here today. So before going the question, let me show you a community indigenous practice to protect river erosion. May I have your attention, please, Sarah, to show the image?
Sure. Could I please request the slides to be online? Thank you. Over to you, Janito.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. This is basically called bundle, called by local people. This is local knowledge, which we promoted through the TROSA project in Brahmaputra, Jinjiram, and Tista river basin. This is called bundle, and which is made bamboo, wood, and other eco-friendly materials to protect riverbank from erosion. This is actually not hard engineering, but very effective in sense of cost effective and timely action. So when we talk about climate finance, we notice there is an accessibility gap among the climate vulnerable community, donor, and the implementing organization. For example, if we talk about Green Climate Fund, GCF, very limited organizations have access to get this fund. In Bangladesh, organizations like PKSF, EAT-CALL can apply for this fund. So still fund remain to the technocrat. But who are frontline warrior, they remain excluded. I'm talking about the direct climate vulnerable communities. They should be involved in the process because they know very well about their problem and also what will be the solution. So our recommendation here is to localize the fund like as endowment to ensure easy access for the vulnerable communities. For example, if the erosion is for Brahmaputra community, then the endowment fund should be near the Brahmaputra community. So I think, Sarah, that's all from my side. And here I wanted to share how indigenous knowledge actually can be a good solution for the climate vulnerable people. This picture actually we have taken from the northern region, from the Brahmaputra, Tista, and Jinjiram river basin. So we actually want community to make their decision in terms of climate risks fund. So this is our message, and it is very clear to be involved the community in decision making and designing process. Thanks, and that's all from my side.
Sure. Thank you so much, Janatun. And this example is extremely interesting because this is a very good demonstration of how local level innovation has the potential for scaling up for the communities. And I think this brings us to a very good segue into our next set of questions where which kind of builds upon how financial instruments should be made accessible for the community so that such innovations can be scaled up. So let me quickly move on to our next set of perspectives, which is focused on multilateral issues and introduce multilateral convenings and also introduce our next panelists. Please, we have Dr. Jyoti Raj Patra, who is the regional representative Asia for CIMAVI, and we have Leo Palo from Asian Development Bank, who is the associate and climate change officer there. Raj is a development practitioner working on cross-cutting issues of climate, water, gender, and social inclusion. And Leo has extensive experience on using geospatial tools to map cropping systems, stress-prone environments for agriculture to allow strategic implementation of interventions at the local level. Now, just bringing in Raj here, and Raj, we've heard from Janatul, we've heard from Danika, and they've shared their experiences on their initiatives. It would be very enlightening to hear from you. What are the lessons that that can be learned from different governance contexts, specifically to inform resilience of international climate finance, and how these can again be linked to broader transparency and accountability measures like disclosures, and which can help in effective implementation of climate finance projects. Over to you, Raj.
Yeah, thanks, Shreya. Thanks for this opportunity. I'll try and build on what Danica and Janatul already presented. So I have 3 points to make. In terms of making the climate finance that we are talking about more inclusive, transparent, and accountable, three things I would like to highlight. First is definitely the one on participation of the communities in decision making, which Jonathan already identified in the presentation, but I just wanted to highlight like this participation should go more beyond just participation in decision making. It is participation across different levels of governance, planning, investment, monitoring, and evaluation. So the entire cycle, the engagement needs to be there. Just to give you a quick example from the one of the program that SIMA, my current organization, is implementing. It's called the Water Justice Fund in Bangladesh, Nepal, and Kenya. And the whole idea of this Water Justice Fund is built on the principles of locally led adaptation, where the focus is mostly on identifying and supporting locally led initiative, primarily those by the women at the local level in some of the most vulnerable contexts. And the process involves participatory grant making. We call it PGM. So it is one of the examples which clearly shows how you involve the local communities, the women groups across the decision making cycle in terms of programming, implementation, and monitoring. So that is my first point. The second one I'd like to emphasize when we talk about inclusion is information around inclusion. Quite often it ends up with exercises which focus mostly on the gender equality part, but we miss on the social inclusion part. So from our experience in the programming, we always emphasize on the need for a very detailed analytical gender equality and social inclusion, GSE in short, information that needs to inform the design of the climate finance initiative. So that is very important to ensure that inclusion happens across the implementation cycle. We talk about the vulnerability, we talk about the differential capacities of different communities, groups who are often marginalized, and we miss them in the design process. So GSE and a strong GSE as part of the design process is important. Now, building on these two important aspects of inclusive participation and GSE, my third point is mostly around looking at climate resilience beyond financing. So it's more than just financial capital and inclusion. Experience shows it's mostly when we have other capitals that come into play. For example, the most important aspect is that of shifting power at the community level, which is at the core of vulnerability of communities, as we all know. So I think it is not only very, it is absolutely important to have the climate finance flowing to the communities, but most importantly, to ensure that other capitals like social capital in terms of agency and equity, the ecological capital in terms of the integrity of the ecosystem and knowledge systems are also integrated into the climate action initiatives. So this will ensure any kind of maladaptation or negative impacts on people who are not whose capacities or capabilities are not adequately integrated. And as part of this, the other important aspect is when it comes to inclusive climate finance is that of capacity enhancement to understand the risk, which I think Danica also clearly outlined in terms of the data, the stakeholders engagement, because risk and climate risk is very dynamic. So in terms of the finance to be able to meet the risk context, it is very important that the understanding that the capacity of the communities, the local institutions who are working on those climate initiatives are supported through. And here is a very important example or the information I'd like to share. If you look at the global landscape of climate finance 2025 report, which was released very recently, nearly 80% of climate finance was sourced domestically. And this is where I think the emphasis should be more on bringing in this kind of capacity, understanding, knowledge of the actors and the institutions at the domestic level, including those at the community and household level. So that's my kind of emphasis, that when we're talking about climate finance to make it inclusive, we look at the processes across the governance system. Most importantly, at the core is the power structure that should be looked at in terms of shifting the power in favor of the local communities, and then the importance of ensuring that the whole uh, financial capital is also clubbed with other social capital, ecological capital, and some of those capitals in terms of knowledge systems at the community. So I will stop here and look forward to further engagement.
Sure, sure. Thank you so much, Raj. And these are all very, very good perspectives. And I think you've already kind of summarized a bit of what you've said. For me, I think participatory grant making comes across as a very, very good approach, specifically in steering finance to communities and ensuring gender inclusion as well. And I think this gives a very, very good stage for me to now invite Leo to the discussion and to share about what he's hearing. And he's hearing from civil society on their experiences. And based on this and your own experience, Leo, how do you think multilateral institutions like ADB can ensure that benefits of climate-linked instruments or funding reach at the community level? We are already hearing a lot of good examples. So if you could
Yeah.
share the perspective at your end as well.
Yeah.
So please feel free to come in, Leo, now.
Thank you very much, colleagues. Good morning. Again, good morning and good afternoon, esteemed colleagues. So, I was really thinking what to share for this session, and it may be useful to share the climate risk assessment process for investment identification that ADB is scaling up in many countries with the intention with the intention of identifying locally relevant climate adaptation options that can be taken forward as a concrete project investment concept. So in this session, let me share with you the work of ADB in Amu Darya River Basin, covering Uzbekistan. So Uzbekistan is a downstream country covering almost 2/3, where the country receives almost 2/3 of water from the Amu Darya River Basin. Um, it is without adaptation measures to promote water resources management and water use efficiency, Uzbekistan may face severe shortages of water resources, increased desertification, and land degradation. This of course, increasing in number of droughts, which may cause agricultural instability and food insecurity. Uzbekistan water flow, as I mentioned, relies mainly on two major river systems, the Amudarya, and where it contributes 2/3 of water resources that are used for agriculture, domestic, industrial, and other types of uses. However, there is growing evidence of water scarcity as documented in many reports and in many assessment studies, and this may increase this water scarcity risk is expected to further get severe in the near and long term future. So in this context, the climate risk assessment was conducted in close collaboration with the Ministry of Water Resources to enhance river basin planning and identify possible climate adaptation investments option in the Amudarya River Basin. So the assessment follows two approaches. One is a very much top-down climate modeling to identify hotspots of climate risk at high resolution district level, where risk here is defined as a dimension of hazards, exposure, and vulnerability. So that's more of a top-down approach where we try to map out the different hotspots, patterns of hotspots, climate risk hotspots within the country, covering the Amudarya River Basin, and this was combined with a local stakeholder engagement, more of a bottom-up approach to better understand the underlying socioeconomic vulnerabilities and identify what are the measures that are locally relevant on a in the local context. Next slide, please. So for the climate risk assessment of each district was analyzed into five regions. This is in the upper zone, mid zones, riverine zones, lower zones, and the RLZ zones. So here the magnitude of the bars, as you can see in the chart below, indicates the climate risk levels of each hazards. Higher bars means higher risk, and this also shows that the different zones as have initials of U, M, L, R, and A, have different sets of hazards, which entails a different type of measures that needs to be implemented within those different geographic zones. So the Ministry of Water Resources was led the consultations and validation of the risk mapping with river basin and provincial authorities. This is very much important process because we need also the concurrence and buy-in from the national level that the approach is sound, and they agree with the results of the mapping exercise. Next slide, please. So after that we have identified the hotspots for climate risk. We sampled 3 districts. We call it a deep dive into the 3 districts in Kitab, Gurlen, and Kanlikul. Of course, this was informed by the climate risk mapping and this deep dive was used to better understand priorities for adaptation and develop the proposed portfolio of adaptation measures. So the climate risk for each district is shown in the table below. So different zones will have different sets or dynamics of climate risk. So what we did is that we started with a socioeconomic survey and focus group discussions in these three districts to FGDs to different stakeholders to develop the preliminary adaptation measures that was later validated and refined during the district level stakeholder consultation workshops. And from those district level workshops, we again consolidated the results and presented this through a national level consultation engagement in Tashkent, attended by several line ministries to adjust, of course, reformulate and confirm the findings. And of course, this is an important process that we make sure that whatever adaptation, that the adaptation measures that we have identified in the at the local level is also is also aligned with the national development priorities or the sector development plans at the national level. So in that way, there's a high likelihood that measures that we have identified at the local level could be financed through using public funds or with support from external financing institutions. Next, next slide, please. So the findings from the climate, yes.
Leo, could I request you to please share the example more quickly, please?
Yes, thank you very much. So for this, we have these are the sets of adaptation options that we have identified at the district level, coming from local consultations and the climate risk assessment. So these are flood mitigation, nature-based solutions, conservation agriculture at the upper basin area, early warning advisories, and modern practices for soil management and irrigation in the riverine geographic zones, and irrigation modernization to reduce water stress, climate smart agriculture, and rehabilitation of existing water utilities in the RLC regions. And it is complemented by a different sets of soft measures, mainly improving their forecast system, developing PPP models for water management, digital platform, and piloting some of the innovations to reduce water losses. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. Next slide. So what's our takeaway from this exercise is that the process the upstream assessment allows for identifying adaptation related investments that are locally relevant, and ensuring that measures are consistent with national development priorities is, of course, very important. To some extent, the measures can be considered in public investment priorities of the government. Top-down and bottom-up approaches takes a lot of time and effort, but it's a way to ensure that investment planning are grounded by evidence and resonating the priorities for adaptation at the local level. And lastly, although not very much related to upstream assessment, there are also grant financing windows within ADB that have a particular focus on community level resilience actions, and usually these are like the Japan Fund for Prosperous and Resilient Asia and the Pacific, climate community resilience partnership program are some of the funds that is used to leverage to co-finance important resilience aspect of the project.
Sure.
So
thank you so much, Leo. Sorry, I will have to stop
yes,
you
please,
here,
yeah,
and
yeah.
we'll have more opportunity to talk to each other. And thank you so much for sharing this very interesting initiative from Uzbekistan. And I'm sure it's quite enlightening for each of us, specifically in the civil society space, to get better understanding of multilateral processes, since it's helped us in refining our advocacy on climate finance for communities. And very quickly, now we have a very good segue now to invite my last panelist here, João Costa, who's the Executive Director at Hydropower Sustainability Alliance. And João has expertise that lies in fostering high-level engagement with development agencies, NGOs, financiers, and governments to advance their integration of sustainability principles in just energy transition. And I think, Jao, this is a very good point for you to like come in, since you've heard from the civil societies, you've heard from multilateral institutions, and just to based on your experience at HS Alliance and given your opportunity of work, could you tell us that how to engage the private sector and the donors and entities and civil societies, and what are the gaps that you see in this engagement of communities to each of these actors specifically with respect to climate finance? And how can the communities be brought into the climate finance narrative and action in a more concrete manner? Over to you,
Mhm.
John.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to be at the World Water Week event. So thanks to all the guests here. To answer your question, Shreya, and I don't even have to introduce the whole Sustainability Alliance, we don't have time, but I'll leave the links to how do we align these expectations between communities, financiers, NGOs, banks, which I mentioned, but also companies and the corporate world and governments. We need a common language. We need a common understanding and a common expectations of what a project, a sustainable, responsible project should be. I'm talking about hydropower projects, as that is the core of our work. We sit at the nexus of water and energy and food. So the water power, the hydropower project is a complex project. It involves impacting biodiversity systems, involves impacting communities, and involves impacting financiers. And it has an impact on climate change and is impacted by climate change. So we need to set a good understanding of what is a good project. Now, these impacts are complex, especially and intangible, hard to grasp by financiers, for example. What is the impact of community? What do communities think about the project? How are they impacted? What is the voice of, for example, indigenous peoples to a project that will affect their land? So we bring in a standard, a set of requirements on what a project should meet. For example, achieving free, prior, and informed consent of indigenous peoples, achieving good consultation, grievance mechanisms with affected communities, vulnerable groups. And then we have a way to report that in a very clear manner so that communities understand the result of that as auditing, and financiers as well, and companies as well. So we all align these expectations. And that is our work, to set the bar, to make it transparent to everyone, and then use it. And people and communities and banks and governments can use that sort of standard. And that's where we sit. It's complicated, but we try to make that simple, as other standards do. But I hope this answers the first bit of your question, Shreya, with the
Yes, please, John.
the part of what we do and how do we align this. So why is this important? For the communities, it's obvious. They want to understand what's going on in their project, how they're affected, and how they can benefit from the project. We don't want projects that build a lot of, for example, generate a lot of electricity to a faraway city or an industry. We want the communities that are affected to also benefit from that project. So we want to guide project developers to those sorts of practices. Sharing benefits, building schools, building capacity in the communities. Most of the times thinking outside of the usual concept, like, oh, a hydropower project that will bring a lot of jobs. But most of these jobs that we think about immediately are construction jobs for men. So how will women benefit from the opportunities there as well? How will the young people benefit from the opportunities as well? So that's where we want to raise the bar, not just construction jobs, it's more than that. And not just during the construction, not create dependencies, but actually use these projects as a lever for economic development, for livelihood improvement. And to close the circle, this is exactly the sort of project that climate financiers want to finance. They don't want projects that are risky. They don't want to finance projects that will show up on the news because they don't respect communities and they are facing protests. They want to to finance projects that are responsible, that respect communities, that respect the environment, and then make them look good. If that's a thing that drives positive impacts in the communities, then so be it. And our job is really to promote that and to make sure that we keep raising the bar and on transparency, on aligning all these expectations. Yeah, so that's in general terms how we involve communities, how we try to raise the bar. This is obviously linked in with climate aspects. That's one of the big elements of our standard. So environmental, social, and also the climate aspects, mitigation and resilience. How will this project be resilient to climate change? How will it contribute to the resilience of the system in which it stands? So that's in general, very quick, very general terms of what we do and how we try to bring it all together in such complex a world as hydropower.
Sure. Thank you so much, Zhao. And these are very interesting approaches. And I think the approach of having key groups like women and youth from the beginning of the initiative is from what we also learned from our work at FFA as a network, that it helps from the get-go if they are part of such groups. And many thanks for bringing this and highlighting this again. Now, before I move to the next round and ask our panelists to share their reflections on each other, I would just like to make another housekeeping announcement that please look in the chat. You can drop your questions there for any of the panelists, or on the chat or on the Menti link that's provided. Please feel free. My colleagues are tracking that, and we already are receiving some of the questions which we'll hear later from, and I'll share that. Now, moving ahead in the panel, and we want to try an interesting approach here. And we've seen that all of the panelists have shared their experiences, the work that they do in their organizations. And now I'm looking at them now and would want to call on them to share if any of the interventions or insights that the panelists shared of their work, did they stand out for them, particularly with the significance for their work on climate finance or with the communities. So that would be really interesting to hear. And I'll call on now Danica if she wants to share in that perspective and her reflections on the panel discussion. Danica, if you can come in now.
Thank you, Shreya. I think on top of my mind, it's all of us are talking about multi-stakeholder approaches. So it's not just, again, as I've mentioned a while ago, it's not just receiving the money, but for us to ensure that we have tangible and impactful initiatives at the local level, and to make sure that, our climate finance is really reaching our beneficiaries. It's not only a perspective of the donor, but everyone should be part of the conversation from the inception phase, from the implementation, and of course from the monitoring and evaluation in the latter part. And I resonate also with Zhao's point on ensuring that we align the common language, assessments, expectations also, because it's not just throwing out the money, but it's also ensuring that we are accountable also. The donors are accountable. Us beneficiaries are also accountable, but we have an ownership also of our initiatives at the local level. So that's my takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Danica, for sharing. And I agree that we are hearing a lot of multilateral perspectives and multi-stakeholder perspectives. And now I'm looking at Raj. If you could share what are your reflections from the panel, if there is something that resonates or stands out for you.
Yeah, thanks, Shreya. I think in terms of one of my key reflection, I'd like to just focus on Zhao's presentation, where he talks about the whole idea of involving the youth, the women and the women groups in the community, and about benefit. But one thing he emphasized was to look more around not only the kind of infrastructure that we talk about, and there is a question in the chat as well, around infrastructure operation and maintenance, but to look beyond it. And he talked about the need for linking it to livelihood improvement, climate risk reduction, some of those contexts. So in terms of this understanding, I think this is very critical. When we're talking about shared water ecosystems, we quite often look at the way the water resources are shared across different economic activities. But we need to also focus on some of the opportunities through which the communities have been cooperating or collaborating ever since they started engaging in those systems. So I think that is very important in terms of understanding that the cultural and local context, in terms of cooperation, in terms of history, in terms of diversity, when we talk about initiating any kind of climate action, because those information and those understanding and those knowledge system is very critical. And this is, in my opinion, most important when we talk about designing any kind of climate action or resilience building initiative, to make it more context specific and locally owned. So that's my quick reflection. Thanks, Rhea.
Thanks a lot, Raj. And I would have really liked to call more panelists to reflect, but I see that our questions are really coming in. And Raj, you've already touched upon the questions that are coming for Zhao. So Zhao, I would like to bring in a question that is there for you, in which it's being asked if you can share your tangible example of how expectations of communities translated into a standard. And can diverse experiences of climate change by communities be standardized? Over to you, Zhao.
Okay, great questions. Yeah, fantastic questions. So one of the things we're proud of is we are very transparent. So for good and bad, right? Standards are not perfect. Our standard is not perfect, but we share all of that. We share the reports with the communities and with the whole public civil society before certifying any project. And then the reports are public. Comes to mind immediately from the question around an example of participation of Indigenous communities. We had really good examples in Canada with First Nations, example of benefit sharing and real engagement in decision-making processes. So that's the East Main project. I can share the link. It's also, the report is on our website. We have also good engagement, or a good example, in New Zealand with the Maori communities, and an interesting one also in Colombia, where the project actually helped the unrecognized Indigenous communities affected by the project with legal support. They provided legal support and to actually achieve legal recognition by the government that they are Indigenous groups, and support them in improving their livelihoods. It included resettlement, so it's not a perfect scenario. So they took care of that in a really integrated manner. I would invite you to have a look at those reports in our website, and we're writing about that as well. So those are a few examples of how projects can support and achieve that free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples before the development. Now, the other question was around how can expectations of different communities around the world be standardized. That's one of the biggest challenges of standards like ours, is how do we create a standard that raises the bar for everyone, but is also adaptable and applicable in different situations. So first thing, include the participation and the voices of the affected community. So in this case, civil society organizations in the definition of our standard, and we do that always since the beginning. We actually included Oxfam in the first definitions of the standard, and we're now going into a standard review, which is part of our system. Every 5 years we have to review our standards. So we're inviting everyone to join this review. So that's the first point. Include the voices in the definition. The second point is make sure that that we can hit a balance of raising the bar, but also keeping broad enough so that the auditors can adjust to the reality or adapt and understand the reality.
Sure.
Right. I also have to stop here, but happy to discuss in further detail.
I know this is such an amazing discussion, and I would
Yeah.
love to continue, but we are constrained with time. And I have my questions myself, but I'm looking at the audience questions, and there are a couple of questions for you, Danica, for the Climate Finance Accountability Initiative that was shared. If you could elaborate on the key accomplishments that are part of the Climate Finance Initiative, and specifically when there is limited availability of documentation, etc., and also how through this, if there is any experience, these initiatives or implementation were translated into better nationally determined contributions by any of the countries or states. So if you could elaborate more on that, Danica. I would just request a 2-minute intervention because I already see that we just have almost 10 minutes left. So very quickly, Danica, if you could bring that just here.
Yes, I also answered the question on the chat, but just to give you a background, ICSE is working closely with several stakeholders. So in terms of the NDC, climate finance on the NDC in the Philippines, we're working with the Ministry of Finance. So all the recommendations, all the assessments that we are developing based on the Climate Finance Accountability Initiative tracking work, we try to share it to them also so that they could adopt it in the process of developing the MRV system of the NDC climate finance. Some of the milestones for CFI is that we really banked on our partners who can do the work at the local level, because the numbers are really vague at the point of data gathering, but the information is always at the local level. So we do trainings with several CSOs who would like to develop a robust research also on climate finance tracking at the local level. And we're partnering with universities here in the Philippines to redesign the local tracking initiative so that it would be a balance of the technical aspect and the practical aspect also. So I think those are the points I've also shared. Thank you, Shreya.
Thanks. Thank you so much, Danica, and very interesting. I have a lot of reading bit on to do, but I think that's for later. We have one question for Raj, and it's specifically linked to the participatory grant making that you shared. What are the key principles of participatory grant making specific to climate finance, and how does this differ from mainstream funding? And how does it ensure sustainability of the practices? So, Raj, if you could touch upon this question.
Yeah, thanks, Shreya. Yeah, and thanks for this question. In terms of the principles of participatory grant making, as I briefly highlighted, the large part of it is based on the locally led adaptation principles. And I have shared the practice paper in the link. So in that document, there are clear the depiction and the presentation of the principles of participatory grant making, how we involve different institutions in the community, from local NGOs to community-based organizations to peer groups and expert groups at the local level. So that's the whole idea of the participatory grant making. And the important thing in the question is how does it differ from mainstream funding? And I think there are two particular elements. One is definitely, I already talked about at the core of the design of the funding is the locally led adaptation principles, particularly looking at focusing on women-led initiatives. And the second important aspect is around the support for shifting the power in terms of capacity within the community by supporting other initiatives which just go beyond finance. So I think this is a very unique opportunity, or the initiative within the program, where we look at the diversity of capitals, as I shared initially, not only on just delivering the finance to the community, but in terms of building their agency, building their capacity, and trying to kind of shift the power in terms of the most vulnerable in the community. And the third element is around co-financing. And this is not just from the community contribution, but through local level engagement, advocacy with the local government institutions, planning bodies, mobilize financial and non-financial resources from some of those institutions. So these are the three areas which I think are quite unique to the program of the Water Justice Fund, participatory grant making. And in terms of sustainability, it is mostly around working with the local institution and trying to identify opportunities through which you can tag into the locally led initiatives by the government in terms of development work, climate work, and other sectoral initiatives like protection of ecosystems, protection of water bodies, agriculture, and other economic investments done by the local communities and the local governments. So I will stop here, Sreya, and I have shared the practice paper for those who are interested to learn a bit more about the
Sure.
participatory grant making approach. Thanks.
Sure. Thanks a lot, Raj, for sharing that. And I think there's still so much to discuss on this topic, but sadly, we are just coming to the close of this panel. And there's been such pertinent sharing of experiences from each of the organizations and at various level. And from what we are hearing, there are clear recommendations that are emerging for various actors that we've talked about. If we talk specifically for the financial institutions, there is a need to implement robust and transparent human rights policies and have better due diligence aligned with the social aspect of policy making, and also have international standards so that some of the issues can be standardized and there is better transparency across the funding chain, and there is ethical investment practices. And when we see that a lot of the projects that were shared were basically at the multilateral development banks level, and there is a lot of potential through them to strengthen the climate finance for vulnerable and water dependent communities and ecosystems, and specifically for increasing their concessional and grant based funding, ensuring that the funding that they do reaches to these communities and they are part of the decision making. And there is better disclosures when it comes to aspects like project information, and there is gender as well as social inclusion promoted. I think there would be a lot of details involved in each of our works when we are all working towards this advocacy. But for the financial institutions as well as multilateral development institutions, these are clear recommendations that are coming in. And I would like to, and each of these recommendations that we are providing have detailed breakdown and as part of a communique that we have prepared based on the work that Oxfam programs like FFA and TROSA do, and they are actually undertaking in this context. And there is and there is actually there's a link for this communique that has been shared by my colleagues in the chat. And just give me an issue. I think there's a technique. Hello, am I audible? Was I unmute throughout this time?
Ye-
I'm sorry, I didn't realize.
Just
For
for
me,
for
it's
a little
unmuted.
bit. Just for a little bit, you were muted.
Okay.
You're
Sorry. I see that Janatun has raised her hand, and apologies, Janatun, I'm not able to see that screen so well. Please come in and please come in now before we end.
Thank you, Shreya, for giving me the opportunity once again. I actually after the quick revision of the set question and also the discussion from the Zhao, I just wanted to agree with Zhao. For climate finance, I think we always need to hard engineering and also need big investment. Sometimes even we don't. Sometimes even the money is needed, but sometimes you might find community might not need the money, but the technical support or the facilitation. So we need community need-based services and money. We simply want community to be involved in the decision making, starting from the design, and the process should not be complicated. So I just wanted to share my opinion. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, and thank you all.
Thanks, Jonathan. Apologies, I had a technical issue. My screen froze and I somehow couldn't see that I'm muted and I couldn't see Jonathan. Apologies for that, Jonathan. Just now that, thanks for that perspective, and that helps a lot for me to close now for this. And as I mentioned that there are clear recommendations that are coming in for the financial institutions, for the regulators, for the multilateral development institutions, and we've tried to kind of summarize what we are hearing now and what we've learned from our work through various initiatives at Oxfam and our work at Fair Finance Asia as well as FROSA. And under this context, Fair Finance Asia has tried to build a communique which will be shared with by my colleagues in the chat. And through this communique, we are bringing in clear recommendations linked to climate finance for the communities. And I would like to specifically now thank all the panelists for joining us today, and specifically the organizers as well for giving us an opportunity to convene on such an important topic and have such a lively discussion. And all the participants for being so well integrated and asking such important questions and making this discussion very, very fruitful. Thank you all, and thank you everyone, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye.